Call us if she doesn't make it. Juliana Parker heard the words through the thin hospital curtain before she fully understood she was awake. The doctor's voice was low. Those were her parents. A nurse answered even lower. They said they're hosting Christmas dinner. Juliana tried to move, and pain flashed through her hips so violently her fingers clawed at the blanket. A brace locked her pelvis in place. Something tugged beneath the bandages along her ribs. The room smelled like antiseptic and melted plastic, and somewhere beyond the curtain, Christmas music played too softly from a nurse's station radio. She remembered ice on the highway, headlights sliding sideways, metal folding around her like a fist. Then she remembered giving the doctor one phone number. Her mother. Juliana forced out a whisper, "Are they coming?" The nurse stepped into view, but she didn't answer right away. That silence did more damage than the crash. And then a receptionist appeared at the door, holding a sealed cream envelope with Juliana's name written across it. "A woman in a grey coat paid your entire hospital bill," she said. "She asked me to give you this when you woke up." Juliana blinked at her. "What woman?" The receptionist's hand tightened around the envelope. She wouldn't say. Juliana Parker was 29 years old enough to know when people were lying gently. She worked in hospital billing herself, so she knew what came after emergency surgery. Forms, balances, deductibles, payment plans that followed you home and sat at your kitchen table like another injury. She had been driving home for Christmas because Elaine Parker had called 3 times that week saying, "Families show up, Juliana. That's what decent daughters do." So Juliana had packed gifts she could barely afford, left work early, and taken the frozen highway toward the house where she had spent years trying not to be the difficult child. Now her parents were only 3 hours away, sitting beside a decorated tree, while she woke up with a fractured pelvis, internal injuries, and strangers lowering their voices around her bed. The doctor came in after the receptionist. His expression changed when he saw she was alert. "Juliana," he said carefully, "you were very lucky. The surgery went as well as we could hope." She looked past him. "Did my parents answer the phone?" He hesitated. "Please don't protect me from it," she said. His jaw tightened. "Yes, they answered. And my father said." The doctor looked down at the chart. "He said to call if your condition became critical." That was the professional version. Juliana had already heard the real one. "Call us if she doesn't make it." The receptionist stepped closer and placed the envelope on the rolling table beside Juliana's bed. It looked too clean for that room, too deliberate, like it had arrived from a life where people still cared enough to write names by hand. "There's one more thing," the receptionist said. "The woman gave specific instructions." Juliana stared at the envelope. "What instructions?" "She said you're not supposed to open it here." The receptionist swallowed. "She said, tell Juliana Parker not to open this until she gets home." Juliana's throat tightened. "She knew my full name." "Yes." "Did she say why she paid?" The receptionist shook her head, then glanced toward the hall like she was deciding whether to say the rest. "She cried when she saw your chart." Juliana looked at the sealed envelope, then at the empty doorway where her parents should have been. Why would a stranger pay everything for a woman she had supposedly never met? The envelope stayed on Juliana's bedside table like a second heartbeat. Every time the monitor beeped, her eyes moved back to it. Cream paper, her full name, no return address. A stranger had done what her parents wouldn't do, and somehow that felt less comforting than impossible. Her phone buzzed against the blanket. "Mom, heard you're awake. Don't make this dramatic. We'll talk after Christmas." Juliana stared at the message until the letters blurred. Not "Are you in pain?" Not "We're on our way." Not even "I'm sorry." Just a warning. The nurse came in to adjust her IV. "Do you need help responding?" Juliana locked the screen. "No." But 10 minutes later the phone rang. "Mom." Juliana let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice came out thin. "Hello." Elaine Parker exhaled like Juliana had inconvenienced her by surviving. "Well, finally." Juliana closed her eyes. In the background she heard dishes clinking, laughter, someone saying, "Where's the cranberry sauce?" Christmas dinner was still happening. Her chair at the table was probably empty or worse, used for someone's coat. Elaine continued, "The hospital made everything sound very alarming, but clearly you're awake, so let's not turn this into a family scandal." Juliana's fingers tightened around the phone. "I had surgery." "Yes, and you were in the hands of professionals. Your father and I couldn't abandon a house full of guests in the middle of Christmas. You could have come after. The roads were icy. They were icy when I was driving to you." Elaine went quiet. That silence was familiar. It was the sound that came before Juliana apologized for noticing something true. But this time she didn't. She looked at the envelope again and asked the question that had been pressing against her ribs harder than the stitches. Did Dad really say, "Call us if she doesn't make it"? For a moment, only the Christmas dinner noise answered. Then Elaine said, "Your father was under stress." Juliana opened her eyes. "That's not an answer." "It was a frightening call, Juliana. People say things poorly when they're frightened." "Were you frightened enough to come?" Elaine's tone sharpened. "Do not start." A chair scraped in the background. Then Richard Parker's voice came on the line, firm and flat, the way it always sounded when he was ending a conversation before Juliana had finished having it. "Juliana." She swallowed. "Dad. Your mother says someone paid your bill." Juliana didn't answer right away. "Of course that was what mattered." Richard repeated, "Who paid it?" "I don't know." "How do you not know?" "She didn't leave a name." "She?" "A woman in a grey coat." There was a pause. Not confusion. Recognition. It was so brief Juliana might have missed it if she hadn't spent her whole life studying her parents' silences. Richard said, "Do not sign anything." "I haven't." "Do not accept charity from strangers." "She already paid." "Then do not open anything she gave you until I see it." Juliana looked at the envelope on the table. "Why?" "Because you're on medication, you're vulnerable, and you don't understand what people can attach to money." "I work in hospital billing." "You process forms," he snapped. "That does not mean you understand consequences." The words landed exactly where he aimed them. For years, Richard had spoken to her like adulthood was something he could revoke whenever she became inconvenient. Elaine took the phone back. Her voice softened, which somehow made it worse. "Honey, we're only trying to protect you." Juliana almost laughed, but her ribs caught the sound and turned it into a wince. "Protect me from the woman who paid for my surgery," she asked, "or from people finding out you didn't come?" Elaine's voice dropped. "You will not embarrass us in front of the family." There it was. The real injury. Juliana pressed the phone against her ear and stared at the ceiling tiles. 2 years ago, she had told Elaine about a hospital patient whose mother arrived too late to fix anything except the loneliness. Juliana had stayed after her shift to help with relief paperwork. She remembered coming home exhausted and saying, "Sometimes strangers are the only people who show up." Elaine had looked up from folding napkins and said, "Don't get sentimental. Strangers don't become family." Richard had added, "And stop bringing those stories home. You can't save everyone." Back then, Juliana had thought they were just tired of hearing about work. Now Richard's pause after grey coat sat in her mind like a locked door. Elaine said, "Are you listening?" Juliana answered, "Yes." "Good, we'll discuss this after Christmas. Keep the envelope sealed." Juliana looked at it again. For the first time in her life, being told not to do something did not make her smaller. It made her curious. A nurse knocked lightly and entered with a cup of water. Juliana used the interruption to say, "I need to rest." "Juliana." She ended the call. Her hand trembled afterward, not from guilt exactly, but from the shock of hearing silence and realizing she had caused it on purpose. The nurse set the water down. "Your parents." Juliana nodded once. The nurse glanced at the envelope. "The woman who left that asked about you." Juliana turned her head. "What did she ask?" "Whether you had visitors." Juliana's chest tightened. "What did you say?" The nurse hesitated. I told her not yet. And she looked through the glass at you for a long time. The nurse lowered her voice. Then she said, then she still doesn't know. Juliana's fingers went cold. Still doesn't know. Not poor thing. Not I hope she's okay. Still doesn't know. Juliana reached slowly for her phone, every movement pulling pain through her body. She opened Elaine's message again. Don't make this dramatic. Then she turned the phone face down on the bed. It was a small motion, almost nothing. But for Juliana Parker, it was the first locked door she had ever put between herself and her parents. That night, while snow tapped softly against the hospital window, the billing office received a call from a man who introduced himself as Juliana Parker's authorized representative. He said his name was Richard Parker, and he wanted access to everything. The next morning, the billing supervisor came into Juliana's room, holding a folder against her chest like it contained something breakable. Juliana was sitting upright for the first time, pale and sweating, both hands gripping the bed rails while a physical therapist adjusted the walker beside her. The supervisor looked from the therapist to Juliana. Is this a bad time? Juliana tried to straighten, pain burned across her pelvis. No, what happened? The woman shut the door. That was when Juliana knew. The supervisor pulled a chair close but didn't sit. We received a call last night from someone claiming to be your authorized representative. Juliana already knew the name before she heard it. Richard Parker, the supervisor said. The physical therapist stopped adjusting the walker. Juliana's face went still. My father. He requested information about the payment made on your account. He asked who made it, whether the payment could be reversed, and whether the funds could be redirected through family reimbursement. Juliana stared at her. Family reimbursement. The supervisor's mouth tightened. His words. Juliana let out one breath, sharp and small. Her parents had not driven 3 hours to the hospital. They had not sat beside her bed. They had not asked if she could walk or breathe or sleep without seeing headlights when she closed her eyes. But Richard had found time to call billing. Not to pay. To control the money someone else had given. The supervisor continued. He also implied you may not have been capable of accepting assistance. Juliana looked down at the IV bruise darkening her hand. I didn't accept anything. I was unconscious. That's part of why I'm here. The supervisor's voice became careful. I need to confirm directly with you. Do you authorize Richard or Elaine Parker to access your medical billing information? No. Do you authorize them to discuss payments, donors, refunds, or account adjustments on your behalf? Juliana's answer came faster. No. The supervisor nodded once and wrote it down. That one word changed something in the room. No. Not maybe, not after Christmas. Not when Dad calms down, not if Mom cries. No. Her phone started buzzing before the supervisor reached the door. Mason. Juliana hadn't spoken to her younger brother since before the accident. Mason Parker was 25, charming, forgiven before he apologized, and still living close enough to their parents to be used as proof that the family was fine. She answered cautiously, Mason. His voice came through low and rushed. Jules, are you okay? The question hit harder than she expected. I'm in the hospital, she said, so no. I just found out how bad it was. Mom told everyone you were awake and being dramatic. Juliana closed her eyes. Mason kept going. She said anesthesia made you confused and that you were accusing them of abandoning you. They did abandon me. I know, his voice cracked slightly. Aunt Lydia just asked why nobody went to the hospital, and Mom said Dad handled everything. Juliana's eyes moved to the billing supervisor, who had paused near the door. Handled what? Juliana asked. That's why I'm calling. The family's on video right now. Mom's telling people you're not thinking clearly and that she and Dad are managing the hospital situation. Juliana's fingers tightened around the phone. Managing. That was the word her parents used when they wanted obedience to look like concern. Mason said, Can you join? I think you need to hear this. Juliana looked at the supervisor. Can you stay? The supervisor hesitated only a second. I can stand by the door. Juliana accepted Mason's call. The screen filled with faces arranged in little boxes. Aunts, cousins, Elaine in pearl earrings beside the Christmas tree, Richard in a green sweater with a mug in his hand. Behind them, the dining room table was dressed with candles and gold chargers. Juliana could see the empty chair at the far end. Her chair. Elaine's smile froze when Juliana appeared. Oh, Elaine said, Juliana, you should be resting. Aunt Lydia leaned toward her camera. Sweetheart, you look awful. Why didn't anyone tell us you had surgery? Elaine cut in quickly. Because we didn't want to alarm everyone until we had facts. The doctors had things under control. Richard nodded. We've been praying non-stop. Juliana stared at the screen. The man who told the doctor to call if she died was sitting under Garland, holding coffee, telling relatives he had been praying. Mason Square was dark except for part of his face. He looked furious. Elaine folded her hands. Juliana is heavily medicated, so please don't upset her with too many questions. Juliana's voice came out quiet. I have one question. Richard's eyes narrowed. Elaine said, Honey, now is not. Why did you tell the doctor to call only if I didn't make it? Nobody spoke. The silence spread through the call in real time. Aunt Lydia's mouth opened. One cousin whispered, What? Mason said, Wait, what did she just say? Richard set his mug down. That is not what happened. Juliana looked at him through the phone screen. Then what happened? Elaine's polished expression cracked at the edges. Your father was frightened. You are taking a painful moment and twisting it in front of people. I asked if you were coming, Juliana said. You stayed for dinner. We had guests in our home, Elaine snapped. Your brother had brought Claire. Your aunt had driven in from Dayton. There were icy roads. We made the best decision we could with the information we had. Aunt Lydia's face changed. Elaine, your daughter was in emergency surgery. Elaine's eyes flashed, and we were told she was receiving care. Richard leaned toward the camera. This is exactly what we were concerned about. Juliana has a habit of making crises larger than they are. The billing supervisor shifted by the door. Juliana saw it. So did Mason. Mason said, What does that mean? Richard sighed, as if disappointed to have to explain her. Your sister has been unstable about money and medical matters for some time. We were considering whether she might need help making decisions. Juliana's stomach turned cold. There it was. Not just a lie after the accident. A story prepared before she could defend herself. Elaine jumped in, softer now, performing for the little boxes on the screen. We love Juliana, but she gets overwhelmed. She becomes suspicious. We didn't want a stranger taking advantage of her while she was vulnerable. Juliana looked at the supervisor. Did my father ask for the donor's information? The supervisor stepped fully into view. Elaine's face lost color. The supervisor said, Ms. Parker has not authorized either parent to access billing information. A call was received last night requesting donor details, possible reversal of payment, and redirection through family reimbursement. That request was denied. Aunt Lydia gasped. Someone else said, Richard. Richard stood so abruptly his video shook. That woman has no right to discuss private matters on a family call. Juliana said, Neither did you. Elaine pointed at the screen. End this, Juliana. No. The word landed harder the second time. Juliana turned to the supervisor. Please document every call from Richard or Elaine Parker. Remove them from all contact permissions. Medical, billing, discharge, everything. The supervisor nodded. I'll update it immediately. Elaine's voice rose. You are making a terrible mistake. Juliana held the phone with both hands so it wouldn't shake. No, I'm correcting one. Mason's face came closer to his camera. Jules. His voice sounded different now, not confused, not neutral. Ashamed. What? Juliana asked. I just checked Mom's page because Aunt Lydia said people were commenting. He swallowed. She posted a Christmas photo yesterday. Elaine froze. Mason read from another screen. Grateful our family is safe and together." The call erupted. Aunt Lydia said Elaine's name like a warning. A cousin asked, "Was Juliana still in surgery when you posted that?" Elaine reached toward the laptop. "This is being taken out of context." Juliana didn't say anything. She looked at the tree behind her mother, the candles, the plates, the proof that life had gone on without even lowering its voice for her. Then Mason's expression changed. His eyes moved off-screen, reading something new. "Jules," he said slowly. Juliana's grip tightened. "What?" Mason lowered his voice. "Dad just texted me." Richard shouted from somewhere off-screen, "Mason, don't." But Mason kept reading. "He asked if I could get into your apartment before you come home." Juliana did not go to her parents' house after discharge. Elaine left 3 voicemails saying it was common sense for Juliana to recover in the family home. Richard sent one text that read, "You are not thinking clearly. This is exactly why we need to be involved." Juliana read it while sitting in a wheelchair by the hospital exit, wearing borrowed sweatpants, a surgical brace under her coat, and hospital socks stuffed awkwardly into boots she could barely bend to reach. Mason stood beside her with her discharge folder tucked under his arm. "You sure?" he asked. Juliana looked through the glass doors at the grey winter morning outside. Snow had hardened along the curb. Every passing car made her body remember the crash before her mind could stop it. "My apartment," she said. Mason nodded. "Okay." It was the first time he had not argued on their parents' behalf. The ride was quiet except for the GPS and Juliana's uneven breathing whenever the car turned too sharply. Mason drove like the road was made of glass, both hands locked at 10 and 2. Halfway there he said, "Dad keeps calling." "Let him. He's going to be furious." Juliana watched bare trees slide past the window. He already was. Mason glanced at her, then back at the road. "I should have known something was wrong with them." Juliana almost answered automatically. "It's fine. You didn't know. They didn't mean it." The old sentences lined up in her mouth like trained dogs. She swallowed them. "When you grow up in it," she said, "you learn which parts not to look at." Mason didn't speak again until they reached her building. The first sign was the lock. Juliana saw it before Mason did because she knew her door, knew every chip in the paint, every scratch near the handle from years of carrying grocery bags and missing the keyhole. These marks were new. 3 thin silver gouges cut through the dark metal around the deadbolt. Mason leaned closer. "What the hell?" Juliana's hand tightened around the walker. "Don't touch it." He stepped back immediately. She took out her phone and photographed the lock from 3 angles, each click sounding louder than it should have in the hallway. Mason said, "You think Dad? I think your father asked you to get into my apartment before I came home." Mason flinched at "your father." Juliana hated that it came out that way. She also knew she meant it. The door still opened with her key. Inside, the apartment looked almost normal. A mug in the sink, a blanket folded over the couch. The tiny Christmas tree she had decorated before leaving for her parents' house blinked blue and white from the corner. Then she saw the desk. The top drawer was half open. Juliana moved toward it slowly, the walker scraping against the floor. Every step sent pressure through her hips, but she kept going. "Mason," she said, "look at the folder." The green folder where she kept tax documents and medical forms was sitting crooked on top of the desk, instead of inside the drawer. Mason opened it carefully. "It looks like everything's here." "Looks like," Juliana repeated. Nothing was obviously stolen. That made it worse. Whoever had tried to get in hadn't been looking for jewelry, cash, or electronics. They had been looking for paper. Proof. Permission. Something they could use. Juliana backed into the chair by the kitchen table and lowered herself inch by inch, jaw clenched until the pain settled into a hard pulse. "Call the police," Mason said. Juliana already had her phone in her hand, non-emergency line. The dispatcher asked questions in a calm voice. Juliana gave answers in the same tone, as if reporting someone else's life. Attempted entry. Visible damage. Possible connection to family member. No, she did not feel safe giving that family member access. Yes, she wanted a report number. When the call ended, Mason was standing near the window, face pale. I thought he just wanted to check on the apartment, he said. Juliana looked up. Did you? He rubbed both hands over his face. No. That was the first honest thing either of them had said about Richard in years. Juliana's phone rang again before she could put it down. Hospital billing office. Mason turned. Answer it. Juliana put it on speaker. This is Juliana Parker. The billing supervisor's voice came through tense but controlled. Ms. Parker, I wanted to notify you directly. Your father called again this morning. Mason muttered, Of course he did. Juliana asked, What did he want? He requested donor information again. When denied, he suggested the payment may have been made under false pretenses and said your family might need to challenge it. Juliana looked at the sealed cream envelope on the kitchen table. The receptionist had tucked it into her discharge bag before she left. Until now, it had felt mysterious. Now it felt dangerous. The supervisor continued. He also asked whether your discharge address could be confirmed. Mason took one step closer to the phone. You didn't give it to him, right? No, the supervisor said. Ms. Parker removed all permissions yesterday. Nothing was released. Juliana closed her eyes. Her father had tried the hospital, then Mason, then billing again. Cause and effect arranged themselves in front of her with cruel simplicity. Her parents were not only afraid of being embarrassed. They were afraid of what that woman in the grey coat knew. Please document that call too, Juliana said. Already done. And send me copies of any access requests. We can prepare a record for you. Thank you. When the call ended, Juliana sat in silence, staring at the envelope. Mason pulled out a chair across from her. Are you going to open it? Juliana touched the edge of the sealed flap. The instruction came back clearly. Do not open this until you get home. I'm home, she said. But before she could break the seal, someone knocked. Not a soft knock. 3 sharp hits. Mason looked through the peephole, and his whole posture changed. Jules, he said, it's them. Juliana slid the envelope closer to herself. Don't open it. Elaine's voice came through the door. Juliana, we know you're in there. Richard added, open the door. This has gone far enough. Mason looked at her. Juliana's body felt suddenly too weak for the room, but her voice didn't shake. Let them in. Mason opened the door only halfway and kept his hand on it. Elaine stood in the hallway wearing a camel coat, leather gloves, and the expression she used when arriving at church after a fight in the car. Richard stood behind her, jaw tight, eyes already scanning past Mason into the apartment. Elaine lifted a casserole dish wrapped in foil. I brought food, she said. Juliana looked at the dish, then at her mother's face. You brought a prop. Elaine's mouth tightened. That is a cruel thing to say to your mother. Richard stepped inside without being invited. We need to talk. Mason closed the door behind them but stayed standing. Richard's eyes landed on the kitchen table. On the envelope. Something in his face sharpened. Juliana saw it and placed her palm flat over the cream paper. Richard said, Give me that. No. This involves all of us. No, Juliana said again. It has my name on it. Elaine set the casserole down too carefully on the counter. Juliana, you are recovering from trauma. You are not in a position to understand what's happening. I understand someone tried to get into my apartment. Richard's face hardened. Careful. Mason stepped forward. Dad, did you? Richard turned on him. Stay out of this. You asked me to get in here before she came home. To make sure the apartment was safe. Juliana pointed toward the door. The lock has tool marks. Elaine's eyes flicked to Richard for half a second. There it was again. Recognition. Juliana said, What were you looking for? Richard's voice dropped. You are making accusations you cannot support. I filed a police report. Elaine inhaled sharply. Richard went still. That changed the room. For the first time since they entered, they looked less like parents and more like people who had miscalculated. Elaine recovered first. You filed a police report against your own family. I filed a report about my damaged lock. You have always done this, Elaine said, voice rising. You take private family matters and hand them to strangers. Juliana tapped the envelope, like the stranger who paid my hospital bill. Richard moved toward the table. It was quick, not a lunge, not enough for anyone outside the room to call it violent, but enough that Juliana's body reacted before her mind did. Her shoulders jerked back. Pain shot through her pelvis. Mason stepped between them. Don't, he said. Richard stared at his son as if he had never seen him before. Move. No. Elaine's face flushed. Mason, this is not your concern. She's my sister. The words settled into the apartment with a weight none of them expected. Juliana looked up at Mason's back. For years he had been the easy child, the forgiven one, the reason her parents could say they were good at love. Now he was standing between her and the hand reaching for her name. Richard pointed at the envelope. You have no idea what that woman wants from you. Juliana said, then tell me who she is. Elaine snapped, you have no idea what that woman has already cost this family. Silence. Even Richard looked at her. Elaine realized too late what she had said. Juliana's fingers went cold around the envelope. So you do know her. Elaine turned away. That is not what I meant. Mason looked from his mother to Juliana. Mom. Juliana slid one finger under the sealed flap. Richard said, Juliana, stop. For once she didn't. The paper tore open with a clean, final sound. Inside was a handwritten letter folded around several documents. Juliana pulled them out one by one and spread them across the table. A receipt showing her entire hospital balance paid in full. A photocopy of an old patient relief approval form. And at the bottom of that form, beneath a date from 2 years earlier, was Juliana Parker's own signature. Juliana stared at it, breath caught halfway in her chest. Before she could read the first line of the letter aloud, her phone rang. The screen lit up with 4 words. Hospital Legal Office. Juliana stared at the phone until the second ring. Hospital Legal Office. Across the kitchen table, Richard's eyes moved from the screen to the opened envelope. Elaine's hand was still on the casserole dish, fingers curled around the foil rim as if she had forgotten why she was holding it. Mason said quietly, answer it. Juliana tapped speaker. This is Juliana Parker. A woman's voice came through, clear and formal. Ms. Parker, this is Karen Whitlow from the hospital legal office. Are you in a place where you can speak privately? Juliana looked at her parents. Richard's jaw tightened. Elaine shook her head once, a small warning. Juliana said, I'm in my apartment, my brother is here. So are Richard and Elaine Parker. There was a brief pause on the line. Understood, Karen said. Then I'll keep this direct. We have documented repeated attempts by Richard Parker to access your billing records, donor information, and discharge details without authorization. Richard stepped closer. This is a family matter. Karen's voice did not change. Sir, Ms. Parker is an adult patient. She has not authorized you to act on her behalf. I'm her father. That does not grant access. The words landed cleanly. For once, Richard's title meant nothing. Juliana gripped the edge of the table. Her body still hurt from standing, sitting, breathing too deeply, existing in the wrong position for too long, but something inside her went still. Karen continued, Ms. Parker, your father represented himself as having authority over your account. Because you specifically revoked permission yesterday, we are preserving those call records. We recommend you keep all written messages, the envelope you received, and any documentation connected to the payment. Elaine spoke suddenly. You people are blowing this out of proportion. We were trying to protect our daughter. Mason looked at her. From what? Elaine did not answer. Karen said, Ms. Parker, The payment applied to your account is complete and valid. No refund or redirection can be processed without your direct authorization and compliance review. Juliana looked at Richard. So you can't touch it? Richard's face darkened. That is not what this is about. Then what is it about? He looked at the documents on the table and said nothing. Karen finished by telling Juliana the hospital would email a formal record of the unauthorized access attempts. Juliana thanked her, ended the call, and for a moment the apartment held only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the thin plastic crackle of Elaine's gloves. Then Juliana unfolded the handwritten letter. The paper trembled in her hand. At the top, in the same careful handwriting from the envelope, it said, "Dear Juliana Parker, you do not know me, but my son knew your name." Juliana read the line twice before her voice worked. Elaine turned toward the window. Richard watched the letter like it might accuse him by itself. Juliana kept reading aloud. "My name is Margaret Ellis. 2 years ago, my son Daniel was brought into your hospital after a workplace accident. He had no wife, no children, and at the time I was still 4 hours away, driving through rain and begging anyone who answered the phone to tell me if he was alive." Juliana's fingers tightened. A flash of memory opened. A man in a trauma room, a mother on speakerphone sobbing so hard the social worker had to repeat every sentence, and a billing hold that should never have mattered, but somehow did because paperwork always found the wounded first. She read on. "Daniel told me later that a woman from billing stayed after her shift to fix forms no one else wanted to touch. He said she spoke to him like he was still a person and not a balance due. He said she used an employee relief contribution to cover the part that did not qualify, then left before he could thank her properly." Mason picked up the photocopied form. At the bottom was Juliana's signature. Juliana remembered that night now with painful clarity. She had stayed late because Daniel Ellis kept apologizing for being expensive, because he had asked whether his mother would get stuck with the bill if he died, because no one should have to ask that while tubes ran out of his body. She had pushed the emergency charity application through. She had used her own small employee relief contribution for the remaining amount. She had not told him because it seemed wrong to make gratitude part of survival. Juliana swallowed and continued. "Daniel lived long enough for me to reach him. He lived long enough to tell me that a woman named Juliana made sure he was not treated like a bill before he was treated like a person." Her voice broke on person. Mason lowered the form slowly. Elaine whispered, "Enough." Juliana looked at her. "No." The word was quiet, but it stopped her mother. Juliana read the rest. "Daniel died months later from complications. Before he passed, he made me promise that if I ever found you, I would tell you what your kindness gave us. Time, dignity, a goodbye. I searched for 2 years. When I saw your name connected to the accident and confirmed it was you, I came to the hospital. I was told you had no visitors. I am sorry for that. I paid your bill because someone should stand beside the person who once stood beside my son." The letter ended with a phone number and one final sentence. "Please do not let anyone convince you that what you gave was small." Juliana lowered the paper. No one moved. Then Mason dragged a hand over his mouth and turned away, blinking hard. Richard cleared his throat. "There may be tax implications." Mason spun back around. "Are you serious?" Richard pointed at the receipt. "Large payments are not simple. This should have gone through the family so it could be managed correctly." Juliana laughed once. It hurt her ribs, but she did it anyway. "Managed," she said. "You mean controlled." Elaine's polished face finally cracked. "That woman had no right to insert herself into our family." Juliana stared at her. "You knew who she was." Elaine pressed her lips together. Juliana stood slowly, using the table for support. Mason moved to help, but she shook her head. She wanted to be on her feet for this, even if it cost her. "You knew," Juliana said again. "That day I came home and told you about Daniel's mother. You knew Margaret might remember me." Elaine's eyes filled, but the tears looked angry, not sorry. "You made us sound cruel," she said. Juliana looked around the apartment. The walker beside the chair, the envelope torn open on the table, the paid receipt, the scratched lock behind them. You did that yourselves. Richard's voice went cold. You have no idea how much damage you're doing right now. Mason picked up his phone. Richard snapped, put that down. Mason didn't. He opened the family group chat while everyone watched. His thumbs moved fast. What are you doing? Elaine demanded. Mason held up the phone. Sending Aunt Lydia the hospital documentation Juliana already has, your Christmas post, and Dad's text asking me to get into her apartment. Elaine lunged toward him. Mason. He stepped back. No, you told everyone she was confused. They can decide who's confused after they see proof. The message sent with a soft whoosh. Elaine looked as if he had slapped her. Richard's phone buzzed first. Then Elaine's. Then Mason's again and again. Juliana did not need to read the messages to know what was happening. The room changed around the sound. The Parkers' private performance had been dragged into daylight, and daylight did not flatter it. Aunt Lydia called Mason within seconds. He answered on speaker. Her voice came through sharp and shaking. Elaine, tell me you did not host dinner while Juliana was in surgery. Elaine reached for the phone. Lydia, you don't understand the situation. I understand enough. Richard said, this is not a conversation for a group chat. No, Aunt Lydia said. It was a conversation for a hospital waiting room. Where were you? Elaine's face went red. Richard looked toward the door. For the first time Juliana saw it. Not authority, not certainty, but escape. The fallout did not happen all at once. It came in waves. By that evening, Juliana had the hospital's written record in her email. It listed Richard's unauthorized calls, the request for donor information, the attempted redirection through family reimbursement, and the request for Juliana's discharge address. She forwarded everything to herself, Mason, and Aunt Lydia. Then she changed every emergency contact she had. Richard and Elaine were removed. Mason was added. Aunt Lydia was added. The next morning, a locksmith replaced Juliana's deadbolt, while Mason stood in the hallway with coffee and a set of spare keys she had chosen to give him. Richard sent one message. You will regret humiliating us. Juliana took a screenshot and did not reply. 3 days later, Aunt Lydia told her what had happened at church. Elaine had arrived in her best coat, smiling as if nothing had changed. But people had already seen the post, the screenshots, the timeline. When Elaine tried to take her usual place beside the holiday committee table, the chairwoman quietly told her they needed space from the situation. Elaine lost the committee she had used for years like a crown. Richard lost more than that. The hospital's report reached the compliance department at his insurance agency after Juliana filed a formal complaint. He had not accessed protected records, but he had tried to obtain private billing information under false authority. That was enough for an internal review, enough for whispers in the office, enough for the reputation he had polished for decades to come apart in front of people whose opinions he valued more than his daughter's pain. Family stopped calling Juliana to tell her to forgive. They started calling to ask what she needed. Some apologized awkwardly. Some admitted they had believed Elaine too quickly. Mason came by 3 times that week with groceries and drove her to follow-up appointments, quiet at first, then steadier. One afternoon, while helping her adjust the walker near the couch, he said, I liked being the easy one. Juliana looked at him. He kept his eyes on the floor. It meant I didn't have to ask why you were always the hard one. Juliana sat down slowly. You were a kid too. I'm not now. That was the closest thing to a promise either of them made. A month later, when Juliana could walk short distances with a cane, she called the number at the bottom of Margaret's letter. Margaret answered on the second ring. Neither of them spoke for a moment after Juliana said her name. Then Margaret whispered, I was hoping you would call. Juliana visited her on a cold Saturday with flowers balanced in one hand and Daniel's copied relief form folded carefully in her coat pocket. Margaret lived in a small brick house with wind chimes on the porch and a grey wool coat hanging by the door. She was older than Juliana expected, with silver hair pinned at the back and eyes that looked tired in a familiar way. When Margaret opened the door, she did not rush forward or cry dramatically. She simply put both hands over Juliana's and held them. "There you are," Margaret said. Juliana's throat tightened. "Thank you for paying the bill." Margaret shook her head. "No, thank you for giving me my son back long enough to say goodbye." They sat at Margaret's kitchen table drinking tea that went cold because neither of them remembered to drink it. Margaret showed Juliana one photograph of Daniel, not a shrine, just a picture tucked into the corner of a cabinet. A man in a work jacket, smiling like someone had surprised him. Juliana told Margaret what she remembered from that night 2 years ago. Margaret told Juliana what Daniel remembered. There was no performance in it, no debt being exchanged, no demand that kindness become loyalty. Just two women sitting across from each other, with proof that a single quiet act had travelled farther than either of them knew. By spring, Juliana returned to work in hospital billing. The first day back, she paused outside the same department where she had once stayed late for Daniel Ellis. Her body still ached when it rained. Her apartment door had a new lock. Her phone no longer lit up with Elaine's instructions. Richard's name existed only in screenshots and blocked voicemails. At her desk, Juliana opened a new patient relief file and saw the familiar columns: balance, coverage, eligibility, notes. For years, she had believed love worked the same way. Qualify first. Prove hardship. Wait for approval. Accept whatever portion someone decided she deserved. She no longer believed that. Juliana still helped people, she still stayed late sometimes, but she stopped disappearing inside gratitude. She stopped calling obedience peace. She stopped answering calls that began with blame and ended with control. Richard and Elaine kept their house, their tree, their carefully arranged dinners, but they lost the daughter they had assumed would always come back when summoned. They lost Mason's blind loyalty. They lost the family story where they were the victims of Juliana's sensitivity. Juliana lost the illusion that her parents would become different if she suffered quietly enough. And losing that illusion made room for something sturdier. Months after the accident, she stood outside Margaret's house after dinner, steady on her cane, watching snow begin to fall under the porch light. Margaret touched the sleeve of her coat. "Drive safely, Juliana." Juliana smiled at the words, not because the road was harmless, not because pain had vanished, but because this time someone had said goodbye like her arrival home mattered. She went home from the hospital without her parents, but for the first time in her life she did not go home alone.